You can't have a great pie without great crust. And that's why I'm so happy today to share with you my recipe for the flakiest and most delicious crust ever. Now this dough is really easy to make and you can do it by hand. You can do it using a fork. You can also make it in a food processor, or I will be using my stand mixer with a paddle attachment. To get enough dough to make 2 pies or 1 double crust pie, you will need 3 cups, that's 450 grams of all-purpose flour. You can also use pastry flour or a mix of both, because pastry flour will give you more tender crust, but all-purpose flour works just fine. Add 1 tablespoon of sugar, and that's 15 grams. You can also use vanilla sugar. I like to use it because it gives me more flavor, especially for sweet pies. But if you're making a savory pie, make sure to skip the sugar. You are also going to use 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now the salt is going to just boost all the flavors in the crust and in the pie later. To achieve that great balance between flakiness, tenderness, and great flavor, I like to use 1 cup, that's 225 grams of butter, that's for flavor and flakiness, and I like to use 1/3 of a cup, that's 75 grams of shortening, and the shortening is going to give us more tenderness and flakiness. The butter and the shortening have different melting points, so together they create the flakiest crust. I cut the butter into small pieces like cubes, and I do the same for the shortening, and I like to put them in the fridge for about 10 to 15 minutes. Now you might wonder why we need to chill the butter before we use it. Well, when the butter melts, it's going to create steam, and that steam is going to create layers in the dough. Don't we all love those layers? Okay, now add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, or you can also use white vinegar instead. And don't worry, you will not taste it in the dough. Now the acid interferes with the elasticity of the gluten, which will give us a more tender crust. Ta-da! So now if you're going to use your hand to make the dough, just make sure you rub the butter and the flour between your hands, but make sure you also work very fast because you don't want the heat of your hand to melt the butter. And if you're using a food processor, make sure you pulse until you get the right consistency. And if you're using a stand mixer like I am, just start on low speed because you don't want the flour to go everywhere. So let the butter and flour mix very well until you get the consistency of breadcrumbs. Sometimes you're going to have those bigger pieces of butter, that's fine. We need them later, they do their job, so don't worry about it. So now we're going to add cold water very slow. And the amount of water that you will need will vary tremendously according to the weather, to the humidity in the air, also to the type of flour that you're using, or I mean the brand of flour, because even the same like all-purpose flour in different brands has different levels of protein, and the more protein you have, the more water you need. And that's why you're going to add the water slowly, or 1 tablespoon at a time. And you're always going to check between your fingers if the dough is coming together. Once it starts coming together, you don't need to add any more water. So once the dough starts coming together, you're going to divide it into 2 discs, one for the bottom crust and one for the top crust, or for 2 different pies. And put each disc in a saran wrap. Make sure before you use the dough, you let it chill for at least 30 minutes or 45 minutes until the dough relaxes and the butter solidifies again. Now I know a lot of you might be very busy just like me, so that's why whenever I have time during the weekends, I take time to make a lot of dough and then divide it, cover it with a saran wrap and put it in the freezer, and it will last for months. And whenever I feel like making a pie or a tart, I just take one, put it in the fridge and let it thaw, and before I use it, I take it out of the fridge maybe around 10 or 15 minutes just to come to room temperature so it's easy to roll. And look at that, you have a pie crust that you can use anytime you want. Stay tuned for my next video. Is going to have a beautiful and rustic apple pie. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I would love to hear from you. How do you use this type of dough? And if you have any other tips or tricks that we can all learn from, please do share. And don't forget that this platform is for learning and sharing. So I hope to see you soon with another delicious recipe. Bye!